What are the Year 6 SATs? So the Year 6 SATs are the standard assessment tests that all Year 6 pupils across England will take in May of 2025. Now, today we're going to be looking only at the reading assessment that forms part of SATs. We're going to be looking at what to expect, how the test is structured and marked, and how you can support your child ahead of their SATs to feel confident and prepared. The purpose of SATs is to measure children's attainment in maths, reading, as well as spelling, punctuation, and grammar. The children are tested on the curriculum content from Year 3 up to Year 6. So it really does cover that whole Key Stage 2 curriculum. The dates have already been published for when SATs will take place this year, and the English reading paper, which we're going to talk about today, will be happening on the 13th of May, which is a Tuesday. Typically, your child will know that SATs is going on. They will have discussions around this in schools, and you may even be invited to an information evening or parents' evening where they'll give you some more information around SATs and how they'll be supporting your child ahead of that. And a lot of the support will not just be around their attainment and their academic side of things, but also making sure that they're not nervous or stressed around this time in school. Some schools like to do SATs breakfast clubs or something where the children can come into school a little bit earlier so they're not feeling rushed and that they can start the day in a positive way. So what we're going to be looking at today is the example from the 2024 SATs, and typically children will have 1 hour to complete this assessment. Now on the Tuesday, this is the only assessment children will do, but it is specified at what time of the day this will happen so that it's consistent across all schools. Now, as you can see here, there's 2 parts to the reading assessment. So your child will get a reading booklet, which will have all of the texts in for them to read. And then they'll also be given a reading answer booklet. And that is the part where they'll be answering the questions about the texts. So it's very important that they get used to having the questions and the text separately, because that's how it will be laid out in SATs. Now, as you can see here on the front cover of the reading booklet, there are 3 pieces of text inside the booklet, and your child will have 1 hour to complete this, or as much of it as they can, which typically allows 20 minutes per text. However, some of the texts are slightly longer and have more questions than others. So in this particular example here, we've got the 2024 SATs paper, and there are 2 fiction pieces, which you can see here, The Leopard and The Girl Who Walked on Air. And then there's also a non-fiction piece, Streaky and Squeaky. So fiction is fake, it's made up, and non-fiction is not fake, so that will be more of like a fact file or informational piece. So it is really important, as much as you can, to encourage your child to read a range of texts, so that if, for example, they're not really used to reading non-fiction, it can put them at a little bit of a disadvantage if they're seeing that type of text for the first time now. Schools generally are really good at making sure children have an access to a wide range of different texts, but that's something you can encourage and support at home as well. So when your child opens the reading booklet, they will see the contents page that tells them exactly where they can find which text on which page. So if you're not sure that your child is familiar with the contents page or what it is or how to use it, that could be quite a nice thing to show them prior to the SATs. So what the children will do is they will be given both the reading booklet and the answer booklet at the same time. But I always would recommend to all of my students that they read the text twice before they start to look and answer the questions, especially if they feel that they've got enough time and they're feeling quite confident. Reading it through twice can really help them to make sure they are getting a really good understanding of the text before they go ahead and answer questions. So as you can see here, the booklet is really nice and bright and colourful, and they always start with some sort of little introduction here, whether it's a fiction or non-fiction text. So there's a few key elements here that your child will notice and be familiar with. Straight away, because of the realistic picture, they should notice that this is a non-fiction text. And also, as you start to read, you can see that there's lots of facts in here. And also the subheadings, for example, are all tenrecs the same? What do tenrecs eat? That's quite a typical feature that you would see in lots of non-fiction texts. So your child will make their way through reading the non-fiction text. And this one, for example, was only 2 pages. So what children are advised to do is to read the text and then answer the questions that match, rather than going ahead and reading the next piece of text and so on. They need to read and then answer the questions. So we'll come to those questions in just a moment, but I wanted to show you an example of a fiction piece of text. So this one again has been taken from last year's paper from 2024, and you can see again here we've got a brief introduction as to what this text is about. And you can see here they've got quite a lot of visual clues, that it's about a circus. It's got this background here as well. And often the text will go over 2 to 3 pages. So this one goes over to a 3rd page as well. So once your child has finished reading each piece of text, they then need to go from the reading booklet to the answer booklet. And there they will find a range of different questions based on the text that they've just read. So they can have open on one side of their table the reading booklet, and on the side next to them they can have their answer booklet. So they've got that reading booklet there with them to refer to the whole time. They're not expected to memorize anything. They've got that there to refer back to. So we're going to have a look at the different types of questions that children would be asked. So the test assesses comprehension skills, not just reading fluency. So that's really key. If your child can read the text, but they aren't able to understand it or make inferences from what's being said, then they're going to find this quite challenging. So in the early stages of learning how to read, we often put quite a big emphasis on learning to decode and being a fluent reader. But then as a child gets older, it's really important to then dig deeper into those reading comprehension skills so that we can see that they're understanding what they're reading. So in the Key Stage 2 SATs, which is the paper we're looking at now, there will be a range of different question styles. So some of the questions might focus on retrieval skills, which is when you're finding answers directly from the text. They might ask you for an inference style question, which is when you need to read between the lines to understand an implied meaning. So it's a little bit like you need to go and figure out a hidden meaning of what's being said and infer. It's not as simple as going to retrieve that information. So it's definitely a more advanced skill to have. Some of the questions might be around vocabulary and language, and then it's really important that your child understands what those different words mean, or if they don't, being able to use the context to try and help them to work out what that word could mean. They may also be asked to summarize, which is when we identify the main points of the text, and make some predictions, which is when you use clues from what's happened before to predict what might happen next. Then another really key skill that does take quite a lot of work to develop is being able to make comparisons. So that might be comparing different sections of the text, different viewpoints, or even two completely separate texts altogether. So throughout the paper and throughout the different question styles, your child can expect to have a range of different questions covering these 6 key skills. So here it's really clear. You can see questions 1 to 13 are about streaky and squeaky. So your child can make sure that they are looking at the correct text and the correct answers and questions together. So you can see here the first question is a multiple choice question, and the children will always be able to see how many marks that question is worth. Now, a good strategy to mention to your child as well is that if they're finding a question difficult, they can move on to the next one. I always say to my students that if they're starting to feel unsure, rather than get worried and panic, just move on. And if you have time, you can always come back to it. Now, if you're wanting to show your child what the questions look like, the styles of questions that they might be asked, you're welcome to share this video with them, but you can also go onto the government website and maybe talk through some of these strategies that we're looking at. A lot of the students as well that I work with know that they need to read the text thoroughly and in a lot of detail, but when it comes to the questions, they rush through. So reminding them to read each question carefully and being really sure about what are you being asked to do is important. It's worth taking those few extra moments to be certain what you've been asked before you go ahead and answer the questions. So when your child completes their paper, they would have answered 3 sets of questions and they would have read 3 different pieces of text. Now, all in all, that will give them the possibility to earn 50 marks. So the reading SATs paper will be out of 50. So lots of parents ask me, how will I know if my child has passed? So we know that the SATs test is out of 50, but the scoring is a little bit unique. Even though your child takes the SATs test in school, the assessments are marked externally. So your child's teacher will not be marking their assessments. There are SATs markers who have had the training, who will be sent the papers to mark, and that's how the process works. So your child's teacher will not be the one who marks their paper. Schools will generally receive the provisional results for both the school's performance as well as the individual children's by the end of July. And at this stage, they are provisional. It is up to schools then how they decide to provide the parents with their test results. Most schools will send home a report or a letter to let you know. This may be completely separate to their end of year school report, or it may be in addition to that. But as schools will generally receive the results in July, most schools send reports out at that time as well. But you will be notified about your child's progress and how they did from your child's school. Then in terms of your child's results, so we mentioned before that there is a possible 50 marks that your child can earn. So what this is called is the raw score. So when your child's paper is marked, they will get a score out of 50, which is their raw score, in the left-hand column here on both of these grids. Now, what that is then converted to is what we call a scaled score. So you can see, for example, if your child got 10 out of 50, that's their raw score, their scaled score would be 88. Now, what this means is that in order for your child to pass, they need a scaled score of 100 or above. So with the different papers each year, that raw score, in order to get the scaled score of 100, might be slightly different. So this table might change year on year. It might be a slight tweak in how much a child needs to get in their raw score in order to pass. So from last year's example, if your child got 27 out of 50, they would have earned a scaled score out of 100, which is the pass mark. That shows us that the child is at the expected standard for children at that age expectation. If your child got below that, so if your child got a scaled score of 99 or below, this means they have not met the expected standard in Key Stage 2, and often this might be referred to as working towards. Now, the reason why this information is important is so that the government knows how schools are performing, but also so that when your child moves on to secondary school, they can be placed into some support or into the appropriate level class for them. If your child does really well, they could be classified as what we call greater depth, and this is where children earn a scaled score from 110 and above. So just to summarize, your child needs to get a scaled score of 100 in order to be shown and seen as they're reading at the expected level for their age. So if you're looking for ways to support your child ahead of SATs, there's quite a lot of things that you can be doing in a very subtle, very simple way that won't necessarily involve sitting down with past SATs papers and going through those to help your child to prepare. So things you can do at home are to read a range of texts. So as you noticed before, the SATs assessment will include both fiction and non-fiction text. So by getting your child really comfortable and really familiar with reading a range of texts, they'll be prepared when they see a non-fiction text as well as fiction. Now, you can do that in a range of ways. Your child might read some magazines, they might read recipe books, instruction manuals, all of those different things. Or if you're not wanting to go to the library or to buy books for your child, there is an amazing website called Epic where you can sign your child up either as a parent or you can do it as a student. And there are thousands of different books on there that they can read and access. There's quizzes that accompany each one, which is then a really great way for them to practice answering questions based on the text that they've read. So that's something I'd highly recommend, and it's completely free to set up as well. Then something else you can do is you could play games with dictionaries or with thesaurus. So if your child is reading a book and you ask them, what does that word mean? And they're not able to use the context to work out the meaning, they could go and find it in a dictionary. A lot of children like to play games with these as well, where you could have your dictionary and just keep fanning through the pages until you say stop. And then they need to try and choose a word on there that they've never heard of before. And it's just a nice way to build their vocabulary in a fun way that's not too daunting. When your child's reading, you can pay attention to their reading speed as well as their fluency and accuracy. So some children race through reading a text, but they're not very fluent or accurate. So for example, they might be filling in a lot of words that aren't there. Now, ways that you can help your child with this is if you're sitting and reading with them and you're noticing that they're adding in words that aren't there. You can take turns reading a sentence at a time, or even using a ruler and holding the ruler up and moving it down as they read, as they might be inserting some words from different places on the page. If they're then feeling frustrated, you can also read to them and model to them that you are reading exactly what's there. You're not filling anything in or changing it in any way. Now, whether you're the one reading to your child or they're reading to you, both of those situations create a really great opportunity for you to ask questions to check their understanding. So, if you are the one reading, you could pause and you could ask your child some questions from those different question styles that we've looked at. So, things like, what do different words mean? Can they retrieve facts? For example, how old was that boy? Or where does he live? You could also ask inference questions where your child will have to use the text to make their own opinion. And that could be something like, how's the child feeling? Why do you think that? Or why do you think they've done that? You could ask prediction questions like, what might happen next? And if your child is the one reading to you, you could just pause them at a natural place and ask them questions as well. A lot of children can feel quite anxious, quite overwhelmed when it comes to SATs. Some children really don't like tests, and that's understandable. So all we can do is support them, boost their confidence, and give them as much reassurance as possible by talking to them about it. So perhaps your child might feel more comfortable if they've seen what a SATs paper looks like, so they know what to expect. A lot of that fear and anxiety comes from the unknown. So by making it really obvious what it's going to look like, how it's going to work, what they need to do, it can take a little bit of those worries away. Getting to bed on time as well is really important, and not just the night before, but kind of leading up to that time in May, getting them into a good routine, making sure that they're getting enough sleep can have a huge impact, especially if they're feeling slightly worried. We don't want them to be up all night and then therefore not perform as well as they could because they're tired. And obviously, what we eat can have a huge impact on how we're feeling, on all of those things. So, making sure that they're eating well and have a really good breakfast on that day, and make sure they're nice, tummies full, with no distractions, and ready to face the day. I hope that's been helpful and given you some ideas and clarity on what the reading SATs are, what they look like, how they're marked, how you'll find out if your child passed, but also some ways that you can help your child prepare before this really big milestone at the end of their primary school career. I really hope that helped. If you do have any questions, and please feel free to comment and I'd be happy to get back to you. Thanks.